In just a few months, Filipinos will choose the next leaders of the country. And the stakes are high as the nation awaits directions in navigating through this overwhelming health crisis, among others.
We have effectively managed COVID-19 in this country. We are still number 30 worldwide, which only proves to show that all other countries in the world are facing the same predicament. No? The virus having mutated and having become more infectious.
They will pitch their cause.
And the foreign policy is friends to all, enemies to none. And he says that the foreign policy will be based solely on our national interests and general welfare of the people.
And why they deserve your vote.
At hanggang sa huli, akin pong susundin kung anong sasabihin ng ating Pangulo dahil if God allows that I serve as one of the Filipino senators, ang akin pong main advocacy will be to continue whatever the President has started, the fight against corruption, drugs, criminality.
Find out their plan of action for change. And as they chart the country's future, their political future is in your hands. Who are qualified? Who are worthy to serve in the 19th Congress? Watch them side by side here on CNN Philippines.
Good evening, I'm Ria Tanjuatco-Trillo. Welcome to the CNN Philippines Senatorial Forum, where we get to know our candidates by asking them questions on issues that matter most to Filipinos. 3 more hopefuls are joining us tonight, and we will introduce them to you in alphabetical order. The 43-year-old senatorial candidate is running under the Federalismo ng Dugong Dakilang Samahan. He obtained his postgraduate degree on international trade and commerce at the University of California, Berkeley. He finished his Executive Master of Arts degree in National Security and Administration at the National Defense College of the Philippines. He served as a Manila City Councilor and became a petitioner in a 2013 Supreme Court case that declared all congressional pork barrel laws unconstitutional. Welcome, former Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission Chairman Greco Belgica. Now, this 77-year-old senatorial candidate is running under the ruling PDP Laban Party. He obtained his Bachelor of Laws at the University of the Philippines. He served as legal counsel of high-profile personalities, including the Marcos family and the Ampatuans. He is also the spokesperson of President Duterte. Welcome, former Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo. And this 55-year-old senatorial candidate is running under the People's Reform Party. He obtained his Master of Laws at the London School of Economics. During his stint in Congress as a party list representative, he co-authored the Universal Healthcare Law, Philippines AIDS Prevention and Control Act, among others. He is the co-founder of the Center of International Law and also a former spokesperson of the Duterte administration. Welcome, Secretary Harry Roque. And all of them are joining us live via Zoom this evening. We would like to remind everyone that this is not a debate. This is about letting voters understand your platforms, principles, and stand on issues. Each of you will be given a time limit to answer the questions. When you hear this sound, that means you have 10 seconds left and you need to wrap up. And for those of you watching online or from home, you can join the conversation by using the hashtag CNNPH Senatorial Forum. So let's get right to it. The country's agriculture chief describes the pandemic and the war between Russia and Ukraine as a siren call to put the country's farming and fishing sectors front and center. On top of the supposed years of neglect from the government, its recovery is now being pushed even further as it grapples from the impact of the global health crisis and soaring fuel costs. In the meantime, a fuel subsidy, a short-term form of aid, is already in place for the agri-sector. Now, if elected, what specific measure would you propose to boost the production and income of farmers and fisherfolk in the long term and ensure food security and stability in the country through agriculture? You have 90 seconds to answer the question, and we will start with you, Mr. Belgica. Your time starts now.
I will establish the Cooperative Development Venture Capital Fund system na will put 1 billion pesos in it so that farmers can have extra capital or additional capital to invest in their products. And I will also invest highly on technology, so to teach our farmers better ways and systems, how to plant and how to harvest at the same time. At the same time, we will invest heavily in the agricultural sector to help our farmers, to give more subsidies to our farmers. The venture capital funds is not a loan; it is an investment to their farming activities and agricultural activities that they need.
All right, sir. Thank you for that answer. Secretary Sal Panelo, now we go to you. What measure would you propose for our farmers and fisher folk? You have 90 seconds.
Well, first thing, we should increase the budget of the agriculture. Right now, they have only 3%. Their requested 250 billion budget was reduced only to, I think, much less. So we need to fund this sector. We have to introduce certain programs that will benefit them. Right now, the problem is the cost of the products. We have to help them subsidize. We have to train certain groups so that these people in the sector will learn from them and help in the production. The problem now is the prices in the other countries are very much expensive. And the reason why it's cheaper to buy imported products is because the government subsidizes these people, and the government should do that. That's why we have to introduce certain laws that will provide good measures for these people, which is the very most important thing really is we have to increase the budget for them so that all projects can be helped, can be funded by such increase in budget.
All right, thank you for that, sir. Now we move to Secretary Roque. What sustainable measures would you propose to help the farmers and fisher folks? 90 seconds.
The agricultural sector is facing a very difficult challenge, not only because of the pandemic, but because of high fuel costs brought about by the recent armed conflict in Europe. That armed conflict will cause fuel prices to rise, which will in turn result in higher farm inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides. Clearly, even if we do not want to provide subsidies, we need to provide continuing subsidies to the farmers. My suggestion is what is in the budget already intended for subsidies because of the pandemic should be continued, this time not because of the pandemic, but because of the very high cost of fuel. Second, I think the Senate has to exercise and review the benefits arising from the rice tariffication law. While I understand that the tariffication of rice should result in lower prices of rice, we need to make sure that the objective has been attained. Through the exercise of oversight function, let's decide once and for all if the rice tariffication law is working. And secondly, we need to make sure that the proceeds of the rice, which is the proceeds of the tariffication from the rice tariffication law, are in fact properly given to the farmers in terms of capital and in terms of loans.
All right, thank you for that, sir. Now let's move on to the next question. A 5 peso and 50 centavo increase in diesel prices is happening this week. It is a historic fuel price hike, and this is just one of the effects of the war in Eastern Europe. This brings to almost 12 pesos per liter the total increase since the start of 2022. As global oil prices soar, local pump prices have gone up for several weeks already. Aside from oil, there is wheat and soybean products imported from Russia and Ukraine, which will likely impact commodity prices as well. But the government assures the public it will implement measures to cushion the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war. So your question is, what contingencies do you propose so Filipinos can cope with the effects of this war? Again, you have 90 seconds, and we will begin with you, Secretary Roque. Your time starts now.
I think we need to proceed with the giving of subsidies, particularly to the transportation sector. We've given already 2.5 billion in fuel subsidies. We need to allot more funds. because clearly the fuel prices will be unprecedented as a result of this armed conflict. We also need to give fuel subsidies to farmers and fishermen because they too are dependent on the cost of fuel for transportation as well as for their means of production, since many of our farmers are already mechanized. But that's the short term. The long term, medium term, we need to review already the excise taxes, even if under the train law, it provides that there has to be 3 months when the price of crude oil should exceed $80. I don't think we should wait for 8 months because clearly the price of Brent crude oil, which we utilize, has now exceeded $100. No? So I think Congress should be called to a special order to remove already the excise tax on fuel. And long term, perhaps we should review whether or not we should restore the price stabilization fund, which was instituted in the past, because in any case, because of the sudden rise in petroleum prices, we have to provide subsidies whether we like it or not. So the economic argument against the price stabilization fund, the oil price stabilization fund, probably will not hold water anymore, given the unprecedented rise in oil prices.
All right, thank you for that. Now, Mr. Bellica, let's go to you. What can you propose so that Filipinos can cope with the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war? Your 90 seconds starts now.
First are subsidies. The government has to give subsidies to the transport sector, especially the poor indigent transport sector. Secondly, the government has to think about tax cuts for companies and industries into the oil sector to keep them at bay and moving. Thirdly, the government has to be seriously considering for the long term developing oil exploration in our country. We have a lot of sources of oil in the country that we should start really seriously developing ourselves.
All right, thank you for that. Now, last but not least, Secretary Panelo, same question for you, 90 seconds.
Well, I think there is no other remedy in the short term but to give subsidies to the concern. We cannot do anything other than that for now. And also, I would suggest that we as a people have to restrict our use of anything that involves fuel and oil, because we can do something about it by reducing, for instance, our movements, our travels. If it is not necessary, then we have to do something to help ourselves. We cannot be relying forever on government subsidies. It has to go hand in hand with the subsidies that will be provided by the government and measures that we as a people should do so that we will not be spending so much in excess of what we have to do.
Okay, thank you for that, gentlemen. We will go on a short break now, but before that, we have a question answerable by a simple yes or no, and you can show us your answer through your signboards. Now, maintaining a work-life balance is encouraged to prevent employee burnout. Yet in some Asian countries, a 6-day work week is still the norm. But a 2022 survey by research firm Milieu shows there is an interest from Southeast Asian employees, including the Philippines, to adopt a 4-day work week. In fact, a New Zealand-based experiment revealed workers became more creative and punctual and did not take long breaks under the scheme. Congress has been trying to pass a law to promote an optional 4-day work week since 2017. Some say this might solve traffic congestion in Metro Manila. But workers' groups are not in favor of the proposal, saying it would just increase the number of working hours of an employee, among many other reasons. So your question is, are you in favor of legislating a 4-day work week scheme? All right. Answerable by yes or no, please put up your signboards. Okay, so it is a yes from all three candidates, from Harry Roque, from Greco Belgica, and Sal Panelo. Thank you for that. This is a CNN Philippines special presentation. When we return, we'll get to know what these candidates are planning on hardly mentioned topic in the platforms of candidates like arts and culture. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this CNN Philippines special presentation. I'm Ria Tanjuatco-Trillo. This is the 7th in a series of senatorial forums as we count down the months and days leading to the May 9 polls. And joining us this evening are former government officials under the Duterte administration, Mr. Greco Belgica, Secretary Harry Roque, and Secretary Sal Panelo. They will respond to questions on issues that matter most to Filipinos. And once again, a reminder, this is not a debate. This forum will allow the public to know more about our senatorial candidates and their stand on certain issues. To our audience, please feel free to join the conversation using the hashtag CNNPH Senatorial Forum. So moving on. We know that culture is the soul of a nation. It defines our nationhood and propels national development. According to ASEAN, the Philippines is the #1 Southeast Asian country that generated a creative economy of $3.2 billion from sectors that include IT and design services, animation, and game development in 2018. Despite the importance of a cultural movement, the creative industries are still facing so many challenges. Your question is, what legislation would you propose to support the promotion of arts and culture? Secretary Panelo, we will start with you. Your 90 seconds begins right now.
Well, for one, we should increase the budget for a particular department that is concerned with that. Because right now, there is a dearth of information on the arts and culture of our country. We have to introduce also a legislation where we have to impose a law that will require schools to include in their curriculum the study of arts and culture in the Philippines. Right now, most of our children do not really know exactly the extent and the depth of our arts and culture. At an early age, they have to learn this, they have to imbibe this, so that we as a nation will know our own art and culture. And we should also propagate and promote that because of this art and culture in the country, it's more not only fun, but it's more enjoyable in coming to this country.
All right, Secretary Roque, we go to you now. What can you do to help the creative industry sector? 90 seconds, please.
I'm proud to say that my wife and I are very big patrons of Philippine art. We cannot reach where we want to go unless we know who we are. And that's precisely why the arts are very important. Now, I think we should encourage further exposure for our artists. Already, some of our masters and big names have been creating quite a stir in the international community, particularly in auctions. No? But I think we should assist the lesser-known artists in the Philippines, because I'm convinced that there's a whole wealth of talent available here in our country. If there is such a thing as the Paris Biennale, or when we should have one in the Philippines, no? So that the foreigners can come and enjoy also the creativity of our Filipino artists. Perhaps we should have an arts month, no? Officially declared and funded by the government, no? Because this would give incentives to the artists, particularly those who are not yet receiving any stipend from the NCCA. But having said that, I'd like to praise the NCCA for the incredible work that they have done in promoting Philippine arts, as well as the National Museum. I think the National Museum under Mr. Bards has become world-class, and I'd like to give credit where it is due. But clearly, the state cannot afford not to support the arts, because as the saying goes, the arts is the mirror to the soul of a country.
All right, thank you for that, sir. Now, Mr. Belgica, how will you support arts and culture in the country?
Arts and culture are the less noticed industries or forums, or less noticed in the Philippines. We ought to give more funding for them to promote themselves and arts in the Philippines. We already have offices and commissions to do this, but as I've said, they're less noticed. So I will hold a forum for these artists to give their suggestions and see how government can support them, seriously support them, especially in their events through media and social media, to expose more students and more people, even adults to arts. So that's what I would say.
That's right. Everybody certainly needs more exposure. On to the next question. The pandemic has forced most offices to work online. Even academic and social interactions have resorted to the virtual world as part of the new normal. But to be able to efficiently cope, one needs fast and reliable internet services. The World Bank says the revival of the Philippine economy also depends on this. However, our nation ranked 92nd out of 140 countries based on mobile internet speed in January 2022. That's according to global monitoring firm Ookla. And in the same month, the Philippines ranked 67th among 179 countries in Ookla's fixed broadband internet speed. Both internet metrics dropped a few notches in the past month. So here is your question. As a lawmaker, how would you improve the country's internet service and make it more accessible and more affordable? So you go first this time. Mr. Bellica, you have 90 seconds.
There's no better way to improve services than to open it for competition. It's well known that internet service providers here are very few. So I will open the gateway for other internet services provider to give their services in the Philippines to offer better services at a lesser cost. And by providing competition, we will have better internet services.
All right, so you're saying open the market, create more competition. Secretary Panelo, what about you? How could you make the internet more accessible and affordable and faster? 90 seconds, please.
Well, right now, there is this amended Public Service Act awaiting the signature of the President. That can help because it will increase foreign ownership from 40% to 100%. And that will induce foreign investors to come in. And it will provide competition for the present forces that are at work now. But we cannot be limiting that to the service private entities. We have also to introduce infrastructures so that companies that will come in will not have difficulty in investing in this company. It's very difficult to install the necessary equipments if you have no roads, no bridges to reach the place that you have to install them. That is what we should do.
All right, Secretary Roque, now for you, same question, 90 seconds. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I think we're suffering from a phobia arising from the graft-ridden NBN ZTE scandal. Now, many years after that, we now know that the countries with higher and faster internet speeds are those that invested in a national broadband network. I admit I was one of those who said in the past that perhaps a national broadband network should be left to the private sector. We have done that. And to give credit where it is due, under the Duterte administration, our speed increased by 500%, but our ranking as 89 over 138 countries is still unacceptable. So judging from the experience of other countries who are ahead of us in Southeast Asia, including Vietnam, Malaysia, and Myanmar, these are countries that use public funds to invest in a national broadband network. So I think it is high time now that we should have a transparent manner by which we should award the building of a national broadband network. It can be done in a transparent manner and in a manner, of course, that would be attuned to technological developments worldwide.
All right, thank you for your answers, gentlemen. It is time now for a question that you will answer with a yes or a no. So if you can have your signboards ready, again, just raise the green for yes and the red for no. Over the years, government officials attempted to dissolve the Presidential Commission on Good Government, or the PCGG. The 35-year-old institution has been criticized for taking too long to recover the ill-gotten wealth of the Marcos family. It has also been tagged as a breeding ground for corruption. As of last year, the PCGG is still running after about 126 billion pesos more in ill-gotten wealth from the Marcoses. The agency is also still in possession of about 54 billion pesos worth of assets for sale or for privatization. So here's the question. Should the PCGG be abolished? Yes or no? You can see those signboards. That is a yes from Greco Belgica. Attorney Harry Roque says no, and that is also a no from Secretary Sal Panelo. All right, thank you for those quick answers. This is a CNN Philippines special presentation. When we return, our guests will answer questions from netizens. So keep your questions coming using the hashtag CNNPH Senatorial Forum. Welcome back to the CNN Philippines Senatorial Forum. I'm Ria Tanjuatco-Trillo, and joining us tonight are former government officials under the Duterte administration, Mr. Greco Belgica, Secretary Harry Roque, and Secretary Sal Panelo. Gentlemen, you will now be answering questions sent in by netizens. And here's one. Despite the enactment of the Mental Health Act, only 5% of the healthcare expenditure is directed to mental health services. Also, the government does not provide economic support for mental health organizations. So, we have a question here from Victoria Kagindagan, and she is asking, what will you do to improve the free mental health services and facilities for the public? We will start with you, Secretary Roque. You have 90 seconds.
I was author of both the Universal Healthcare Law and the Mental Health Act law in the 70th Congress. And I do note with regret the failure of the executive to fully implement, especially the Mental Health Act. What has to be done is to exercise the oversight power of the Senate, particularly in ensuring the Health Technical Assessment Committee, the body formed under the Universal Healthcare Law that would provide for free services to the people, should authorize funding for mental health illnesses. No? Under the mental health law, we have classified mental health disorders as diseases that should be cured and managed. No? And that is why it is high time that we allot specific sums of money from public coffers towards realization of the law, which is to support the treatment and management of mental illness. Now, what is important too is to fully implement a provision of the Mental Health Act, which provides for the establishment of a hotline to deal with the problem of suicides arising from mental disorders. I regret that until now, the hotline is not available. We should start it at the soonest time possible because as a consequence of the pandemic, it is understandable why many people now are suffering from more forms of mental illness. Again, I think the solution is no longer lawmaking because we have crafted the law, its full implementation.
All right, Mr. Belgica, what do you propose to improve mental health services in the country? 90 seconds.
Yeah, first of all, we have to launch an awareness campaign, more mental health awareness campaign, because a lot of Filipinos still brush the issues of mental health. They give very little priority and very little importance to it. So a strong mental health awareness campaign should be launched by government and by private institutions. For it to be strengthened. Secondly, forums that will discuss matters that's needed with for mental health that should include Congress and the executive branch, so that to propose new legislations or new actions to address mental health issues.
All right. Now, for you, Secretary Panelo, what will you do to improve the free mental health services and facilities of our country? Your time starts now.
First of all, we need to have mental awareness all over the land. In other words, we should concentrate on giving information on this kind of disease. Number two, we have lost regarding this. But the problem is the funding is very short. So we have to introduce more funds to it. We have to introduce amendments to the present law. Number three, I suggest that we create institutions all over the country, region-wise, where the very function of this institution is to receive info, stories coming from all sectors regarding certain behaviors of people in certain sectors. And then we have also to create seminars and schools that will teach precisely about this mental illness.
Okay, so we have another question now from Facebook. Lilette Paredes asks, how will you ensure your loyalty to the Filipino people. Excuse me, let's go back to Lilette. All right. So she is asking, what proactive steps will you take to maintain your independence from the affiliations you have to your party? Your 90 seconds starts now. Secretary Panelo, you will go first.
Well, even if you are a member of a party, if it does not coincide with your principles and endorsements, you cannot be towing the line of the party. You have to assert your own beliefs and principles. My reputation all along has been that, regardless of whether I belong to a party or not, if it goes against my principles and beliefs, then I'll go against if that party stand is contrary to my own.
All right, thank you for that, Secretary Panelo. Now time for Secretary Roque. How will you prove that your loyalty is to the Filipino people and not the party or the connections that you have? 90 seconds, please.
I think there's something wrong with the assumption of the question. It assumes that we have a very strong political party system in the Philippines, which we don't. Unfortunately, candidates run on the basis of personalities, not on the basis of platforms. Unfortunately, politicians vote on the basis of their personal beliefs, not on the basis of party lines. So I think what we should do, in fact, is to strengthen the party system in the Philippines to make sure that platforms are given priority by the voters and not personalities. Having said that, of course, in relation to the question, the fact that we have a very weak party system will encourage elected officials to vote according to their personal convictions, according to their loyalties as Filipinos. But let's strive to put an end to personality-based politics and move on to platform-based politics.
All right, sir. Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Bellica, how will you prove your political independence? Your 90 seconds starts now.
Well, the best way, none of us can promise tomorrow, but our countrymen can know us by finding out what we have done before. Before I got to where I am today, I was just an ordinary pastor, a small pastor, an advocate fighting the evils of society, corruption, to its highest form. I was the lead petitioner who questioned the pork barrel system, PDAP and DAP. I filed against the former president, Senate, Congress, and other high-ranking government officials. That is loyalty to the country and to the Filipinos, not loyalty to anyone. I am here today, President of the President's Party, the Federalismo ng Dugong Dakilang Samahan. I became chairman and the youngest secretary level of the PACC. I started as commissioner. That's how Filipino can know who I am and what I've done. I've served not to benefit myself. I've served even when I did not have benefit for myself. That's how I can prove I will be loyal to the people and not to my friends or political allies.
All right, with that, it is time to take a short break. But first, here's a question answerable by yes or no. Please raise the green signboard for yes and the red for no. Juvenile delinquency is one of the country's lingering problems. For the past few years, Congress has been trying to amend the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act. Under the present law, the minimum age of criminal liability is 15 years old. This means offenders aged 15 to 17 may be detained in youth centers, while those under 15 must undergo community-based intervention. But some lawmakers want to lower the age of criminal responsibility to 9. Human rights groups and UNICEF lambasted the move, stressing that the government has the obligation to uphold children's rights. So we have Facebook user Erms Alfaro, who is asking, do you agree with lowering further the age of criminal liability? Yes or no? Please raise the green board for yes and the red for no. Okay, that's a very early no from Secretary Harry Roque, also no from Greco Belgica, and a no from Secretary Panelo. So, this is a CNN Philippines special presentation. Up next, our senatorial candidates have prepared questions that will be answered by their co-candidates. So do stay with us. Welcome back to the CNN Philippines Senatorial Forum. This is the 7th in a series of forums where we get to know our senatorial aspirants. Earlier, our guests answered questions on various issues concerning Filipinos. Right now, we will be allowing them to ask questions to each other. So, gentlemen, you will be given 2 minutes to answer. And when you hear this sound, yes, you know that means you have 10 seconds left and you need to wrap up your answer. So, Mr. Bellica, you will be the first one to ask, and I will draw the name of the person to whom you will ask your question. So, I have 2 names here, and I will pick one. All right, I have picked out the name of Secretary Harry Roque, and you will ask your question to him, Mr. Bellica.
Manong Hari, what can you say about the President's anti-corruption campaign?
What can I say about Chappy po? About
What can you say about the President's anti-corruption campaign?
well, I think the President has served, by way of example, the correct conduct for public officials. No? Bagamat hindi natin matatanggal ang korupsyon na overnight, pinakita ni Presidente na sa kanyang simpleng pamumuhay at sa kanyang walang interes sa kahit anong financial na transaction na ang mga naglilingkod sa gobyerno dapat ay maglilingkod at hindi nagninegosyo. No? I think also that the President's policy of publicly shaming those who have been found guilty of corruption worked dahil bumaba naman ang instances of corruption. No? Ang importante talaga is to walk the talk. That is the best tool in the fight against corruption. Dapat hindi hipokrito, dapat pinaninindigan ang mga sinasabi. And I think the President did just that. No? Now, of course, there's a lot of things to be done. No? Some of the reforms I'd like to see is, for instance, the fact that it takes forever for the Ombudsman to investigate and to file cases. I think the Ombudsman should also be given a deadline, like all public prosecutors, that within 90 days that they should come up with a resolution, and they should also be given fixed time frames within which to conduct the investigations. No? Ako kasi ang dami kong kaso na i-file, wala pa ako sa gobyerno on corruption, at saka yung mga kaso ko laban sa PhilHealth na 2.5 taon na wala pang resolution, some of which were also investigated by your office, but unfortunately, only the Ombudsman has the power to file criminal information against them. No? So I think the President, as an executive, did well by serving by way of example, by filing all the cases that he could within the limitations of the law, since under our Constitution, the filing of these cases properly belong to the Ombudsman. Perhaps another innovation would be to come up with a memorandum of understanding between the National Prosecution Service and the Ombudsman, delegating also to the NPS the task of conducting preliminary investigation para mapabilis naman po ang investigasyon ng malitis na po yung mga korap sa gobyerno.
All right, thank you, Secretary Roque, for staying within the time. Now, Secretary Roque, it is your turn to ask a question, and by process of elimination, that means you're going to ask a question to Secretary Panelo.
Secretary Panelo, as Presidential Legal Counsel, what was the most difficult legal issue that you had to deal with in connection with the presidency?
Well, actually, that question has been asked to me several times by reporters, and my answer is standard. There was no difficult question of law that was put up by this administration. Because if we know our Constitution, we know the laws that are applicable to a particular situation, it is very easy to give our opinion on the matter. One of them was the issue on ICC. We know that it has no jurisdiction, not only from the point of view of the President, but even from the point of view of the very law that created the International Criminal Court of Justice. And so it was very easy to discuss it and explore and expound everything that is consistent with the defense of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. So I didn't find any difficult question of law that confronted me during my stint as Chief Presidential Legal Counsel.
Okay, Secretary Panelo, thank you for that. It is now your turn to ask a question, and you will be asking your question to Mr. Bellica, who has 2 minutes to answer. Go ahead, sir.
I will be pushing, if I'm elected senator, for legislation to give free special education as well as free therapy to children with special needs, and also the establishment of caring centers for them. My question is, if you're elected senator, will you join me in pushing this legislation?
Secretary Sal, definitely I will be joining your advocacy in helping special children with special needs. I know that you are a father to a son who has special needs, and you have so much care for special people, and your advocacy is very noble. I cannot help but assist you, support you in your endeavor to help children with special needs in our country. Mabuhay ka, Secretary Sal.
Thank you.
All right, a simple yes there. Before we move on to the last question, gentlemen, let's hear first from our netizens. So once again, we do have several Facebook users, and one is Rosalina Castro. And she asked the senatorial hopefuls to pass a law patronizing our own products. She's critical of the existing importation laws, putting the country's farmers at a disadvantage. She points out farm inputs are now expensive. All right, and we're going to hear from another netizen. This time we have Mark Adrian Gonzalez, and he says, since the Senate is a discerning body for laws, he asks, should the qualifications for candidacy include mastery on medical, engineering, social studies, agriculture, and law? And we have one more netizen. This is Romel Bisco, and he wonders if our aspiring senators here tonight would provide a law related to money laundering. And such a law would say that government officials would not be applicable or fall under bank secrecy, and they would be required to publicize their sal-ends. So, for this next question, you have 2 minutes to answer and tell us, if elected, what would be your priority legislation? We'll start 2 minutes with Secretary Roque.
Well, I was author of the Universal Health Care, and I would prioritize still health because it is still the time of the pandemic. What I'm thinking of now is, given that the biggest threat to the full implementation of universal health care is corruption, is a law that would replace the PhilHealth with the National Health Service. This will achieve two things. One, it will rid PhilHealth of corrupt officials. And number two, it will emphasize that national health care is not medical insurance, because we're not limiting the amount of benefits to the amount of premiums that we're collecting, but we are in fact using public funds. I would also prioritize the end of poverty through the Zero Hunger Bill and the Right to Water Bill, which should ensure within 6 years that all Filipinos will have access to clean and potable water, because we're running out of clean and potable water. I would also prioritize the Freedom of Information law to facilitate transparency in government service, as well as the Whistleblower Act to facilitate the corruption of the prosecution of corruption cases, as well as extrajudicial cases, killings. Because we know that oftentimes corruption cases and extralegal killings can't be solved or effectively prosecuted unless a co-conspirator testifies against his co-conspirators, provided, of course, that the testimony is not coming from the most guilty party. On top of that, we also have a proposed law that would provide a supplemental budget for the victims of Typhoon Odette, knowing that the victims of Typhoon Odette need to rebuild not just their homes, but also their livelihoods. And we are sure that the budgetary allocation under the 2022 budget will not be enough for this purpose. And of course, I would also give priority to a bill that I had already filed, giving protection to journalists in peril.
Thank you for that, Secretary. Mr. Bellica, your turn. Please let us know, what is your priority legislation if elected? 2 minutes starts now.
Yeah, number one, I will work to strengthen the justice system so cases get resolved faster and quicker and not delayed. I will transfer the 24 billion pesos PDAF that I had abolished through the Supreme Court in 2013 when I questioned the pork barrel system, the constitutionality of the pork barrel system, and transfer them to the justice system so that the courts can hire more judges, build more courts, and government can hire more prosecutors and investigators commensurate to the cases filed within their jurisdiction. Two, I will strengthen the anti-corruption law because we have a very weak anti-corruption law and very weak structures to implement the anti-corruption law or to implement the anti-corruption campaign. I will do this so that we can have more funds to put in programs that will create jobs, give more jobs, and improve the healthcare system and services of the Philippines so that Filipinos would not have to worry where to get money to pay for hospital bills and medicines. I would expand the Malasakit Center that was established by Senator Bongo. And number three, I will push for legislations that will create the Venture Capital Funds Office and put 100 billion pesos there to give as capital or investment as capital to companies that close down to get access to capital so that they can open up and give back jobs that was taken away from them. I will also put funds in the education so the children and the youth and parents who want to send them, who are having problems of sending their children to school, can again send children to school. And lastly, I will fight for the restoration of death penalty for heinous crimes and the inclusion of corruption. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bellica. Secretary Panelo, it is now your turn. You have 2 minutes to tell us about what your priority legislation would be if elected to the Senate.
Well, one would be the law that will provide free special education and free therapy to children with special needs. Also, the establishment of caring facilities for them. It is very difficult to educate children with special needs because it's very prohibitive, it's very expensive. And there are few rich, wealthy people who have children with special needs. Most of them belong to the lower class. We need to help them. These children are, to my mind, angels sent to us by God to show us our humanity to them. So I will prioritize that. Number two, we have to introduce amendments to the Tertiary Education Act. Right now, there is difficulty in the poor entering free education because there are restrictions. The restriction is they have to pass certain entrance exams and maintain a certain grade. But the problem is these poor people are not equipped unlike the wealthy ones. So we have to introduce amendments so that if you're born Filipino, you don't have to take entrance exams. What we should do is to provide quota. We will limit the introduction of children of wealthy families into free education because right now only 12% of the poorest of the poor are availing of this free education, and 64% of the upper middle class, as well as 70% of the wealthy ones, are the ones enjoying it, and we're spending billions of money to provide free education to those who can afford. We have to do something about this. It should be the poorest of the poor that should be given. I will also introduce legislation that will give allowance to mothers, barangay captains should have salaries, teachers should have double fishermen, and LGBTQ senior citizens, OFWs, they should also be given certain legislations that will benefit them.
All right, thank you for that, Secretary, and thank you to all our guests this evening. This has been a CNN Philippines special presentation. I'm Ria Tanjuatco-Trillo. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week with another set of senatorial candidates.